Okay, so the world's in a mess. We know that from global warming, and we know that from Fukushima, etc. And I think I'd like to start my lecture by quoting Einstein, who discovered E equals mc squared. The energy of an atom equals the mass of the atom by the speed of light squared. Amazing. And from that came nuclear weapons and nuclear power. And he said at the end of his life he wished he'd been a farmer, because he wished he hadn't done that. But he said the splitting of the atom changed everything, all reality. Thanks, lovey. Save man's mode of thinking, and I stress man. Thus we drift towards unparalleled catastrophe, and we're on the way to that. So what I'm going to do is start from the beginning of the nuclear fuel cycle, how they made the bombs, and then into nuclear power, and what that means for us and all future generations and our children. First of all, the fuel for nuclear power is uranium. And in Australia, where I come from, we've got 30% of the world's richest uranium. And uranium has two basic, they're called isotopes. Uranium-238 and 235. This is present really concentrate, okay, in 0.7%, and it must be enriched to 3% for use in nuclear power. This is what's called depleted uranium. It's left, it's waste, no one wants it, and it's free. But guess what? The Pentagon, to their credit, I'm being facetious, discovered that uranium-238 is 1.7 times more dense than lead. And most bullets and shells are made of lead because it's dense and it gets a great momentum. But if you use uranium-238, it's really terrific. It cuts through the armour of a tank like a hot knife through butter. The only thing is it's pyrophoric, so when it hits the tank, 80% of it burns, producing tiny little particles that can be inhaled into the terminal air passages of the lung. It's very, very carcinogenic, and I'll explain how radiation causes cancer soon, and also why we use radiation to try and cure cancer, because people don't understand that, and I understand why they don't. Anyway, America used 360 tonnes of this stuff in Basra and used a hell of a lot in Fallujah. This is all in Iraq. They're selling these weapons all over the world. And in fact, America conducted and is still conducting a nuclear war in Iraq because much of the area is contaminated with this stuff, little tiny powdered stuff. The children pay in the tanks that have been destroyed. Children are 10 to 20 times more sensitive to radiation than adults. They get cancer much more readily. Little girls are twice as sensitive as little boys. And the incidence of solid cancers now in Basra has gone up 7 times amongst the children, and also in adults, but amongst the children. And babies are being born so grossly deformed without any heads. That's called anencephaly. I've delivered such a baby. It has a face and the base of the skull and a little nubbin of midbrain, so it can cough, it can cry, it can suck, and then within a week it dies. Those sort of deformities are now so common that the doctors in Basra and Fallujah have told the women to stop having babies. This has been a nuclear war conducted between the Tigris and the Euphrates, the cradle of civilization, where writing began, where law began, the whole thing. But the half-life of uranium-238 is 4.5 billion years, and you multiply that by 10 to get the total life of it. So therefore, for the rest of time, the people in Iraq who are contaminated, that for all the generations to come, will have a very high incidence of cancer, leukemia, and genetic deformities. Hands up those of you who knew that. Well, this is your government and your money, and you paid for it, and they're still doing it. I can say Australian, using Australian, they're still bloody doing it. How dare they? This is a war crime. And there's a huge literature in medicine about uranium because we used to, in our ignorance, treat patients with it sometimes until we learnt about it. It's a heavy metal, so it causes renal damage, but it can cause kidney cancer, bladder cancer. It goes to the bone where it causes bone cancer and leukemia and the like. So that's the first thing. It's called depleted uranium. It's not depleted. Well, it's depleted of this, that's all, but it's nasty stuff. Now, uranium decays to a series of what's called daughter products, not sons, notice, daughters. It's all very sexist, this nuclear stuff. One of them is radium. And who discovered radium? Come on. Madame Curie. She stirred pitch blende, and out of that she refined radium. Radium is a very carcinogenic, and it's a bone secret, goes to bone. She died of what's called aplastic anemia because all her bone marrow died. She couldn't make any white blood cells, red blood cells, or platelets anymore. She was so radioactive she had to be buried virtually in a lead coffin. Her daughter died of leukemia too. So we know from way back that radiation causes cancer. We've known forever. Another nasty one is radon gas, and a lot of houses in the northeast, they've got cellars and the radon gas seeps up from the cellar, and radon gas is now deemed by the American Public Health Department, etc., to be one of the most potent carcinogens that we know. Another one is polonium. And do you remember that Russian guy called Litvinenko? I think someone didn't like him, so they had tea with him at Claridge's and dropped a bit of polonium in his tea. It's a potent poison, and within 2 weeks you develop what's called acute radiation illness. Now, if you get a big dose of radiation, like at Hiroshima or Nagasaki or whatever, the actively dividing cells of the body die, so your hair falls out. It's like getting chemo. You get terrible ulcers in your mouth and the whole of your gut. You get vomiting and diarrhea and nausea. And the platelets die, which cause clotting, so you die of massive bleeding and infection, and that's what he died of. It's great gear. And it's also a gas. So the thing that really causes cancer in smokers is actually polonium, because there are little tiny hairs on the tobacco leaves which concentrate the polonium. And when you breathe in the tobacco smoke, there's turbulence at the bifurcations of the air passages. Like when you're in a plane, there's turbulence, and the polonium concentrates in those areas, and that's where the cancers tend to develop. Okay? Now, so when you mine uranium, this is all left behind, and it's usually done on Indigenous land, Navajos, Australian Aborigines, and we don't really care about them at all, do we? No? We used to slaughter our Aborigines, we used to poison their water holes, we used to throw them over cliffs. We were revolting. And in Tasmania, we killed all of the Aborigines. We don't talk about that. We've got a Prime Minister who calls it black armband history. We don't discuss it. And I'm so ashamed. You did a lot of the same things to your native Indians. But this is all called tailings, and it's all left on the ground. Now, if they buried it back in the ground from whence it came, it would be okay. But they leave it around so that people are breathing the radium. The radium concentrates in their food because it's like calcium. Gets concentrated in the green vegetables and the like, and the polonium. So the people who live near uranium mines have a higher than normal incidence of cancer and congenital abnormalities. In the past, 50% of men who mined uranium died of lung cancer because they were inhaling radon, they were exposed to radium, etc. We've never followed our uranium miners up in Australia. We don't want to know. If you don't want to know and you don't want to pay compensation, don't do the study. All right, now I want to describe the forms of radiation. There are X-rays. Hands up those who've never had an X-ray. Okay. Hands up those who get... Yes, you have. you ever had your teeth X-rayed? Hands up those who get a dental X-ray every year. That's medically contraindicated. Do not get your teeth X-rayed. My ex-husband was a radiologist. They buy very expensive equipment and they have to pay for it. Every X-ray you get is cumulative and adds to your risk of getting cancer. Do you understand that? Never walk through those X-ray machines in the airport. Know that fetuses are thousands of times more sensitive to radiation than adults. So if you have to have an X-ray, doctors are not God, although we play God, but ask, why do I have to have an X-ray? And if you're not satisfied with the answer, do not have it. You're allowed to say no. A lot of doctors practice defensive medicine. Your Honour, here's the X-ray. Don't do it. Now, if you've got a cough and you're coughing up blood, you've got to get an X-ray. CT scans give you a hell of a dose of radiation. Do you know they're taking newborn babies and doing a whole body CT scan on them, and you get a really high dose? When you get a fluoroscopy and you have stents put in your heart, you get a high dose from that. A lot of the cardiologists these days are developing cancer because they also get exposed when they're doing the fluoroscopy, which is using X-rays. So what I'm telling you is, don't get an unnecessary X-ray only if you really, really need it, and then it's important. If you have pneumonia, we have to make the diagnosis, all right? Now, X-rays are non-particulate. They go straight through your body, so when the radiologist says, breathe in, hold it, and runs out of the room and hides and go click, that's the moment you get damaged. It doesn't stay in your body. Then there's gamma radiation, which is like X-rays, non-particulate, given off by many of these elements from uranium and many that are made in nuclear power plant. I'll get into that in a minute. So that goes straight through your body too. The people in Fukushima had a hell of a dose of external gamma radiation that went straight through their body. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission and your nuclear agencies only look at gamma radiation. They don't look at what's called alpha and beta. What's that? Well, alpha is actually particulate. Here's an atom. That's the GE symbol, makes good things for life, right? GE, like stoves, irons, washing machines, nuclear power plants and nuclear weapons. They're a wicked company. Wicked. Anyway, here's the atom, and an alpha particle is composed of 2 protons and 2 neutrons, and it's dense in mass, it doesn't travel fast, so a piece of paper will block out, here's a piece of paper, block out an alpha particle. It doesn't enter through the skin because the skin is made of many layers of dead cells, but if it's in your body, like if it gets into your lung here, the alpha particle only travels a very tiny distance, and within that volume, most cells die because the radiation is so high. But on the periphery, as radiation decreases with the square of the distance, some cells remain viable, and those cells are likely to be mutated and develop cancer. So that I'm going to talk about plutonium soon, but plutonium, 1/1,000,000 of a gram, if you inhale it, will give you cancer. 1/1,000,000 of a gram, okay? Then there's beta radiation. That's just an electron. It travels further. Tritium, for instance, which is radioactive hydrogen, is a beta emitter. You call it beta, I call it beta. You say tomato, I say tomato. Anyway, so they're the four sorts of radiation, and they all do the same thing. How do they cause cancer? Well, you know, your body's made of trillions and trillions and trillions of cells. And in every cell, there's a nucleus with chromosomes. And there's a pair of genes on each chromosome called on one chromosome, or one pair called the regulatory gene. And what happens is, if a gene is hit, that time by an alpha particle, an X-ray, a gamma ray, or whatever, it's a Russian roulette, it either dies, the cell dies, or the DNA, which is the deoxyribonucleic acid, is damaged biochemically, and it will sit quietly, and you don't even know that you've had a mutation in a cell in a gene. Maybe by a single alpha particle hitting a single gene in a single cell. And the time it takes to develop cancer is any time from 2 to 80 years. And the cancer doesn't wear a little sign. You get a lump in your breast, you think, don't like that, you know. And then the doctor says, well, we'll do a needle biopsy, pulls out some cells, and you've got cancer. The cancer doesn't wear a little flag saying why it was made. Don't forget we live in a chemical soup, 80,000 toxic chemicals we live with every day, which are infiltrated into our clothes, our furniture, our cleaning stuff in the kitchen, the whole thing. It's up to us to prove to the chemical companies that these chemicals are dangerous, not for the chemical companies to prove that they're safe before they use them. That's wicked. I speak now as a physician, trying to save lives. How dare they cover us with chemicals, most of which are never tested for carcinogenicity. It takes 1 year for the EPA to test only 5 chemicals to see if they're carcinogenic with the rats, and it takes a long time to watch the rats and see what they die of and then work out how many died and the like. Now, and what you need to know is that the radioactive elements I'm going to describe work synergistically with the chemicals. Hands up those who know what synergism is. Okay, so it's not 1 plus 1, one chemical plus one radioactive element equals 2, doubles the rate of cancer. It might be 1 plus 1 equals 10 times the cancer. That's called synergism. They potentiate each other. And so one day, instead of the cell just sitting there, it divides into 2 by mitosis, and then it goes berserk. And it produces trillions and trillions and trillions of cells, and that's a cancer. And we usually can't stop that cell growth. And cancer cells are very invasive. They'll break off from the cancer, get into a little blood vessel, a capillary, and go up to the brain or to the lung. And so the cancer, and they get into the lymph vessels too and spread throughout the body, so that you get secondary cancers or metastases. And cancer's like a parasite. You see the body withering away, and the cancer thrives. And the patient dies, and the cancer dies. So in other words, it takes a single mutation in a single gene in a single cell to kill you, and you don't know it's happened. And we tend to wait in our offices for patients to appear with their cancers or their leukemias and treat them with terrible, horrible chemotherapeutic agents and radiation therapy that kill cells. And because cancer cells really reproduce very fast, they're very sensitive to radiation. That's why we use radiation to try and kill the cancer by focusing the radiation specifically on the cancer. But sometimes, and not infrequently, patients who are cured of their primary cancer, like children with Wilms tumour, which is a kidney cancer, later in life develop a second primary cancer because normal cells around the cancer have been affected and the gene's been mutated. You with me? Okay, so that's why we use radiation to treat cancer. Now, so, you know, the incubation time for a cold, if I sneeze on you, is 2 days, and then you're sneezing. And that's the ace up the sleeve of the nuclear industry. It takes so long to get cancer. The cancer doesn't identify itself. How do we know it does it? Because we've looked at the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and all sorts of people who've been irradiated. We know damn well that radiation induces cancer. All right. Now, the next thing is, when they mine the uranium, they enrich it to 3%. So you've had an enrichment plant in Paducah, Kentucky. And what they do is they turn the uranium into a gas, uranium hexafluoride, and they have thousands of micropore filters made of nickel with tiny holes, and they force the gas through, and on one side stays the U-238 because it's a larger atom, the other side 235. And over a cascade of these things, eventually you get 3% enrichment. Iran is enriching uranium. You can't make a bomb until you've got about 80% enrichment. They say they don't want to make a bomb. They probably don't, but why shouldn't they have bombs if Israel's got 200 to 400 nuclear weapons? Or America's got, how many have you got now? About 8,000 nuclear weapons. You can't, it's what Jesus said, see not the mote in the other person's eye, look instead for the mote in your own eye. You have to be responsible and conscientious and moral. Otherwise, if you're immoral, other countries will copy your immorality, which is what is happening right now. Okay, now the thing is that this is very energy consuming, and it took two 1,500 megawatt coal-fired plants to enrich the uranium. Now, you know they say nuclear power is clean and sustainable and green. Not true, because the infrastructure underlying a nuclear power plant produces a hell of a lot of CO2. Mining. The trucks are about as big as this room. They're huge, huge amounts of fossil fuel, more fossil fuel to enrich it. And they've got hundreds of miles of pipes that transfer the uranium hexafluoride, and it's a very hot gas. So next to these pipes are other pipes containing CFC gas. What's CFC gas used for, or was? What? Yeah, in sprays, refrigerator. And we found that CFC gas, when it rises to the stratosphere, destroys the ozone. And we don't have much ozone in the southern hemisphere in the summer. And Australians, they like to lie in the sun and go brown like the Aborigines, although we're very racist. And the incidence of the incidence of melanoma in Australia is 1 in 9. I think it's 1 in 93 here. And we have a lot of skin cancers. The old people look ghastly. And the dermatologists are actually patrolling the beaches and telling the young kids to put their clothes on, because the girls are now sunbaked with just their bottoms on, their breasts. They think that's, that's the latest thing. But it's inappropriate. It's medically contraindicated. So now CFC is, I think it's 100 times more potent than carbon dioxide. And of the CFC 114 gas that gets into the atmosphere in America, 92% comes from this enrichment plant to enrich uranium. CFC gas has been outlawed by the Montreal Protocol. No one uses it anymore. They use HCFC gas, which is slightly less toxic to the ozone than CFC, in the spray cans. Never use a spray can again. Never use a spray can, okay? Don't use aluminium cans. You call it aluminum, because to make aluminium is an extraordinarily energy-consuming process that creates lots of carbon dioxide. Don't drink Coke anyway, because it's horrible gear. But don't use aluminium cans, and they all should be recycled. Anyway, so the nuclear industry has been, quote, grandfathered out of the Montreal Protocol, so they're allowed to do it. You see? I think they've closed Paducah down recently, but, it's enormously energy consuming. Don't ever let them say nuclear power's clean, green and sustainable. Now, when they've enriched the uranium, they make it into little pellets, like little pieces of chalk, and they have a fuel rod 12 feet long and an inch or two wide, made of zirconium. And they pack these pellets into the fuel rods, and they take them along to a nice nuclear power plant. And they pack 100 tons of uranium in the rods into the core. And it's all submerged in water. And when the control rods made of boron that control the rate of neutrons shooting out from the uranium atoms, they do all the time, this thing reaches critical mass. It doesn't explode, except Chernobyl did. in extraordinary circumstances. The nuclear industry don't call it an explosion, they call it an excursion. But the euphemisms that are used are quite extraordinary. Anyway, so this reaches critical mass and it's very hot. So it boils the water. And steam is created, which is taken off by a pipe, which turns a turbine, which generates electricity. So all a nuclear power plant is designed to do is to boil water. As Einstein said, nuclear power's a hell of a way to boil water. He was right. He was right about most things. Now, this has to be cooled continuously, so nuclear reactors use 1 million gallons a minute of water to keep them cool. 1 million gallons a minute, so they're incredibly intensive. And you know California is in a terrible drought now. In France, during a drought, the rivers dropped so low and they were so hot that they couldn't use the water to cool the nuclear reactors. Then you're in trouble. Now, when the uranium fissions, it makes a whole lot of new elements. And one of them is cesium-137, which lasts for 300 years. And it's a potassium analogue, so the body thinks, oh, it's potassium. And our cells are rich in potassium, so it goes to all the parts of the body, but it tends to concentrate in the endocrine glands, the thyroid, the pancreas. It also concentrates in heart muscle. So in Chernobyl, little children are having heart attacks and dropping dead. Thyroid. It can cause thyroid cancer, like radioactive iodine as well. It can cause hypothyroidism. You know, when it's called myxedema. If you've got hypothyroidism, your hair falls out and you don't lose your sex drive and your periods stop and you're very slow and you eat a lot and get fat. Hyperthyroidism is when your eyes stick out, like, who is that funny guy? What? Yeah, Marty Feldman. His eyes stuck out and your heart beats like crazy and your blood pressure goes up and you can die from hyperthyroidism or Graves' disease. Anyway, this is nasty stuff. It also causes muscle cancers, rhabdomyosarcomas. And on Long Island near Brookhaven, where they had a meltdown and a lot of this got out, about 19 children had rhabdomyosarcomas. We call them rhabdos, and they die. Then there's strontium-90. That's a calcium analogue. So calcium goes to teeth and bones, and if you've got a bone with strontium-90 in it, that's the femur, it can irradiate a bone cell to cause osteogenic sarcoma. Nasty. Teddy Kennedy's son, Edward, had one of those. He had his leg amputated. They generally spread to the lung. They're usually pretty fatal. And they can change a white blood cell so that the white blood cells proliferate like crazy. They're immature, and that's leukemia. Leukemia means white blood, and so people start bleeding and having infections and dying. Strontium-90 lasts 300 years. Then there's tritium, which is radioactive hydrogen, and the nuclear industry says, oh, tritium is fine, it's only radioactive hydrogen. But it forms H3O, tritiated water. And if you live near a nuclear power plant, nothing impedes the escape of tritium except gold. It gets out of everything, plastic, glass, lead, metal. And so tritium's all the time escaping from nuclear power plants into the water, cooling water, and the air. We've found that children living within 5 kilometres, now you don't use kilometres, do you? 2 miles, 2.5 miles from a nuclear power plant, children under the age of 5 have double the incidence of leukemia and a high incidence of solid cancers. Oh, but that study was done in Germany and France and England. So your NRC, it's doing its own study now because it doesn't really trust those studies. Yeah, you're not allowed to ask questions, but what? Of course, yeah. The cooling water is relatively radioactive when it gets out into the river, Susquehanna River from 3 Mile Island. 3 Mile Island was built 13 miles from Hershey's Chocolates. It had a meltdown. The milk, and of course that's the richest dairying area in America because the chocolates are made of milk. The milk was so full of radioactive iodine, they powdered the milk for 8 weeks because radioactive iodine has a half-life of 8 days and it lasts for, about 6 weeks. So they powdered it. And then they used it for the chocolate, except all this other stuff got out too. No one knows the ground measurements of radioactive elements where the cows graze near Hershey's. I've said right from the beginning in a debate with Ed Markey and a lot of people in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, don't eat Hershey's chocolates. And the townswoman came up to me and she said, "Did you say that on purpose?" And I said, "Yes, I'm a doctor." They haven't sued me. Well, they wouldn't, would they? Because then then it would get out, all the information. Don't eat Hershey's chocolates, all right? Don't eat her, and don't give them to your kids. All right, so the next thing is radioactive iodine, and then there's plutonium that's made. I'm only mentioning a few, and I'll show you a chart later with all of them. There are several hundred made. Plutonium is an alpha emitter. These are beta and gamma. That's beta, and that's beta. Plutonium is an alpha emitter. 1/1,000th of a gram can induce cancer. Its half-life is 24,400 years, so it's around for 500,000 years. Right? Every reactor makes 500 pounds of plutonium a year, and if you want to make yourself a nuclear bomb, all you need is 5 pounds of plutonium. 5 pounds. So you are proliferating nuclear weapons by selling nuclear power plants all over the world. Saudi Arabia, they're going to have nuclear power plants and they're talking about getting nuclear weapons now. And every day they're beheading people or they're chopping hands off if people do something nasty. And they're best friends with America. How come Saudi Arabia is one of your best friends? Because they've got oil. Why is this nation a huge... what am I looking for? Colonial power with military bases in almost every country of the world. How dare you? How dare you? Who do you think you are, the world's policeman? Oh, they talk about American exceptionalism. You're only exceptional in making weapons. That's what you don't hardly make cars anymore. And all your jobs have gone off to China. What's America exceptional in? Do you know?
Making their people really sick.
McDonald's. Yeah. No, forget about food. I mean, we're about to blow up the world, so, 67 cents out of your every discretionary tax dollar goes to the military. Lockheed Martin. They're stealing your money. Boeing make planes. Yeah, they make missiles and anti-ballistic missile systems. They're weaponising space now so they can fight war from space and, quotes, affect very many kills. It's called High Frontier. Northrop Grumman, Raytheon. And you don't even have a free healthcare system. Don't talk about single payer. Talk about free healthcare like every other civilised country has in the world, like we do. My friend broke her patella the other day into 8 pieces. She went to hospital, had the best orthopaedic surgeon in Sydney, an anaesthetic. She was in for 5 days. Guess how much it cost? 0. That's where our tax dollars go. That's where your tax dollars should go. Huh? Oh, am I a socialist? Well, Jesus was a socialist, be frank. Right? Leave thy worldly goods and follow me. It's more difficult for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. Okay, that's a little lesson in politics.